look, lawsuits always occur when a new president comes in, and even when an existing president. But what's interesting that we're going to talk about here is the amount of lawsuits that have come forth since Trump has come along. And this has, we're not talking politics, left, right, middle. This is just statistical facts. And the statistical facts are, what happens is states will sue the federal government at times for things. Let me tell you, there's one state that does not get along with the Trump administration. I know it's a shocker. Everybody get ready. But the state of California, and more than anyone, Gavin Newsom, who is politically, I don't care what the situation is, it is a fact. That guy is so far left, I'm not quite sure there's even anyone else over there. But he and the government and the attorney generals have brought a number of lawsuits. And because Trump is kind of hitting the snake, you know what I mean? It's like just whacking it to make it mad. But, oh, by the way, you're not – last week we talked about you're not going to get any more funding for the train. And they're like, what? We've got this funding. So there's things that Trump is doing to California that is making them upset. Let's say the state of California upset. So, but the amount –
and vice versa.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And vice versa.
It's both ways. They're taunting each other.
They are.
And it's interesting for us lawyers to watch this. But statistically – Obama, what happened? So the attorney generals will bring these lawsuits. People who you understand, it's an attorney general's office for the state of California that actually does the suing. And while Obama, during his 8-year term, had approximately, I might be off one or two, 45 lawsuits during his 8-year reign of attorney generals that sued him over different things. The biggest one was what? The Obamacare thing. He had a number of lawsuits against that. Well, Trump so far, this is just attorney generals, not in general, which you laid out to me.
Yeah.
35 lawsuits in his, a little over 2 years now?
And these are multi-state because that
Right.
means that attorney generals from different states are joining into these lawsuits against Trump. And this phenomena is relatively recent because it started in Obama and really got ratcheted up in Obama. And then it's now like hitting its stride in Trump's administration.
And I think in all fairness, we have to point out that these are states that are blue states like California.
For the most part.
The very rare exceptions
yes,
that
true.
have decided, look, we want to be sanctuary states. Trump says, no, I'm not going to give you money. Well, let's all band together and sue him. We want to do this. Well, no, you're not going to do this. Well, let's all band together and sue him. So it's interesting to see the politicization, yes, of attorney generals who have gotten together and turned themselves into little political offices. It's fascinating to watch.
Yeah,
Reagan
administration.
It's on the federal level is the same, in my opinion.
I agree. I'm saying it's great theater.
Yes.
Is it not? There's an adversary and a protagonist and an antagonist, and it's really fun to watch.
So Reagan, during his 8-year period, 39 state lawsuits in 8 years. So he's right there in the Obama's 45, 39. That seems like that's kind of like the target spot because you go in and look at Bush. It said Bush Sr. Don't forget he was only in for 4 years. He had 8 lawsuits. And again, I might be off 1 or 2, but we're right around that point. Clinton had 18 in 8 years, which shows what you said, Denise. Is it starting to?
It's starting to grow, and it's because, in my opinion, it's because that more recently the presidents are using their executive power, and I think that they're starting to, flex that muscle, and so the states are trying to, contain it, and that type of stuff.
Well, I want to take a quick jaunt back in history to the founding of the country. And what one of the concerns were, a major concern was on the part of the founding fathers. And that is, while they understood that we needed a federal government for certain things that were combined interests or unified interests on the part at the time of all 13 colonies that would become states, the big concern there was state sovereignty. All right. And so you had the states that all said, look, we want to be part of this federal government, but quite frankly, up in Maine, we don't want somebody making policy about us who lives in South Carolina because your interests are all different than ours. And so the big thing here was about state sovereignty. It's why we have, I believe, the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which says anything not specifically reserved to the federal government is left to the states to regulate. That's why so states can do traffic laws and various things, because the Constitution doesn't cover that kind of stuff. And I see these lawsuits as really hitting the state, saying,
Right.
okay, the issue of sovereignty is now coming back up, and you're making laws that infringe upon our state sovereignty. Now, I'm not saying I agree with the lawsuits. I'm not saying I agree with California or any of the blue states' lawsuits. But if you justify the lawsuits, I see it being justified under a state sovereignty issue, trying to keep everybody from becoming a national federal government, as some, interestingly enough, after the election, as some have proposed. We ought to just abolish the states and have it be a federal thing. No, state sovereignty needs to stay.
It also impacts the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment makes the laws apply to the states. So certain restrictions on government now apply to the states as well. So it has that interplay between the 10th and the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, so I'm going to continue on. That's exactly right. This is where we need to discuss. But more back to the statistics. So you nailed it perfectly, Denise, when you said it's increasing, because Bush Jr., 8 years in office, 44 lawsuits. So Obama, 45. I mean, that's one off. But again, the interesting thing is, and you're right, it's really Obama and Trump that have really used the executive powers and privileges to go ahead and step maybe a little beyond what they can or can't do, or trying. And so
it's like stepping on the floor with your name on it,
yeah,
but it's stepping on the legislature.
Right. And so they're pushing that a little bit, and these numbers show that it's growing. Now, the quick thing is so far, just in general, though, this is an important statistic, and this is according to, there's an individual from Marquette University, Paul Nolet, a political science professor, that tracks this stuff. And Paul said the following. He said there's been 71 multi-state lawsuits against Trump so far, and that including not just attorney generals, but other type lawsuits. 71 in a 2-year period.
I just wanted to say there are many people who say, well, look at all of these lawsuits and this bickering between the Congress and the president and the courts. We're dysfunctional. I would beg to differ. It's proof that the system is working. They're balancing each other. They're going after each other the way they should, each making sure they don't cede power to the other. It's wonderful to see, I think.
Yes, I totally agree with you there.
Yes and no, and I'm going to go to talk. Yes and no, that there is a point where it gets to be so litigious that things stall. And I agree with you, Cal. That is correct. But where is the breaking point?
Good question.
Where it comes to a halt? The
Right.
government is too busy fighting each other to do anything.
I would say two things on that. I remember when I was growing up, my dad used to use this phrase all the time: "What's good for the goose is good for the gander." And I look at this and I say, well, I wish people would learn from this. If Obama was going to use executive power, he should have understood, and people should recognize that if you set that presidential precedent of using executive power more than folks had in the past, then the next president who comes along that might not be of your political party or have your ideology will use the same thing. The same thing is true with what the Senate did when doing the nuclear option under Harry Reid to make it just a simple majority to avoid the filibuster. Well, if you're going to do that, then when the Republicans are in power, they're going to do the same thing. So, what happens is going to happen.
Here's the interesting thing. Oh, let's impeach Trump. We're lawyers. Pelosi, as left as she is, and people don't like her, a lot of people don't, I think wait a minute. You really want to impeach him when, okay, don't forget, we may be in power later. Does that mean the Republicans? I think there a lot of them are saying, I think Pelosi's thinking that, what you just said.
Well, I think they are. One of the interesting things about the lawsuits against Trump, that about half of them do not involve his presidency. About half of these lawsuits involve his personal conduct or personal business.
Prior or post or during?
Both.
Interesting.
Both.
So what does that tell you about if you're a business person, and again, try not to get political, a non-politician rolling in, a businessman saying, I'm going to shake everything up. I don't care if you're left or in power later. Does that mean the Republicans? I think there a lot of them are saying, I think Pelosi's thinking that, what you just said.
Well, I think they are. One of the interesting things about the lawsuits against Trump, that about half of them do not involve his presidency. About half of these lawsuits involve his personal conduct or personal business.
Prior or post or during?
Both.
Interesting.
Both.
So what does that tell you about if you're a business person, and again, try not to get political, a non-politician rolling in, a businessman saying, I'm going to shake everything up. I don't care if you're left or right, he is shaking everything up, guys and gals. It is shaking it up. And positive or negative, that's what he said he's going to do. He's doing it. And
Absolutely.
I tell you, even within his own party, people are mad at him. Like Romney does not like the guy. I mean, clearly.
Well, there's a lot of people that don't like him, but let's just say this is the time to find out about how far that executive power is going to go.
A Manhattan federal judge who rejected the request by President Trump in order to stop his private records being subpoenaed by the Judiciary Committee, which they're arguing. The Judiciary Committee argues, well, we're investigating this collusion with Russia, therefore we need to look to see if there's any loans or anything fishy going on here in Trump's personal records to determine whether or not there's any collusion. That's their argument. But the judge did say, yes, banks, there's 2 banks, go ahead and turn over the information. The subpoenas are valid. And Trump's team came in and said, look, okay, we don't agree with you. Give us time to appeal. And the judge did grant basically a stay until the appeal is heard. Again, most people know that it's just going to go to the appellate court. It's going to go to the Supreme Court after that.
Right. And in this, there's also another counter case, or not a counter, but a side-by-side case. So the records that the Judiciary Committee are seeking, or in another committee are seeking, are the accountant's records, so Trump's accountant's records, as well as the bank records. And they seem to be on very similar tracks, although they're in different states, which is kind of interesting. And what happens in both cases is the lower court said the subpoenas are valid. That is well within the legislature's power of investigation, specifically Congress, and that the people that have been subpoenaed have to respond to the subpoena. So then the parties on both sides, Trump and the Congress, have agreed and stipulated to expedite these proceedings. So they've all agreed, and the judge has already signed off to stay the impact of it, to then appeal it, and then the appellate court has now agreed to expedite that appeal.
Right. Sometimes there's 2 in the appellate court. They have the full appellate court that'll sit and hear it, and sometimes it's just a small portion, where like 3 or 4 of them. Usually it's 3, and they'll do a partial review. So I don't know if they're going to do the full appellate court's going to review, or it'll just be a partial review. But that's coming up, and we're going to be following this throughout the next few weeks.
Yeah.